In a courtroom filled with tension, a simple, unexpected moment of kindness changes everything. This is the story of a single mother, a hungry child, and a judge who saw more than just a case. He saw people in need. It's a powerful reminder that compassion can make all the difference, even in the most unexpected places. Now let's begin this touching story. The courtroom was an imposing space, its high, arched windows allowing the light to filter in, but doing little to relieve the weight of the atmosphere. The polished wooden walls and stern faces of those gathered inside created a feeling of formality that only amplified the tension in the room. Every movement, every word seemed carefully measured, but the sense of uncertainty hung in the air like an unspoken burden. Lily, a woman in her early 30s with a tired yet determined expression, stood before Judge Hunter. She was a single mother, and the last thing she wanted was to be here in this cold, unforgiving room. Her life had been a series of struggles, each one more overwhelming than the last. Now, here she was, fighting to avoid paying a $200 parking fine that she simply couldn't afford. It wasn't just about the money, it was about survival. The $200 could be the difference between putting food on the table for her 6-year-old daughter Mia and going without. The courtroom was filled with people, all seemingly indifferent to Lily's situation. At the front, the prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a cold, calculating gaze, argued with Lily's lawyer. He had made his position clear. The fine was a legal obligation that could not be overlooked. There was no room for leniency in the eyes of the law. Lily's lawyer, a weary but empathetic woman, spoke with a gentle but firm voice, trying to argue that Lily's circumstances were unique. She wasn't trying to avoid paying. She simply didn't have the means. But despite the sincerity in her voice, the prosecutor's rebuttals were sharp, unyielding. The law, he argued, was the law. As the two lawyers volleyed back and forth, Lily felt herself slipping into the background. She was a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, and she had already spent days stressing over this moment. The fine wasn't just a sum of money. It represented everything she feared: failure as a mother, the possibility of losing what little security she had. If she had to pay it, she would need to sacrifice something else, maybe even food. Lily could hardly focus on the words being exchanged between the lawyers. Her mind kept drifting to Mia, sitting in the back of the courtroom with her little backpack clutched tightly in her lap. The girl looked small in the cavernous room, her eyes wide with uncertainty, not fully grasping the weight of the situation, but aware enough to feel the unease in her mother. Mia had seen the stress in her mother's face for weeks now, and Lily hated that she couldn't protect her from it. All she wanted was for Mia to feel safe, to have a normal childhood, not one filled with constant worry. Lily's thoughts were interrupted by Judge Hunter's commanding voice. "Enough," he said, cutting through the back and forth of the lawyers. All eyes turned to him as he addressed the room with his customary authority. Judge Hunter was a tall man in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. He had a reputation for being strict, for upholding the law without mercy. Many feared him, but Lily knew this moment was crucial. She stood straighter, trying to steady her breath. Despite the nerves that coursed through her, there was a tiny flicker of hope in her chest. She had to believe that somehow, amidst all the legal jargon and technicalities, the judge might understand. At least, she hoped he would. "Let's get to the point," Judge Hunter said, his eyes locking onto Lily. "Miss Lily, you are here today because of a parking fine. $200. You claim you cannot pay. Tell me why I should grant you any leniency." Lily's heart pounded in her chest and her mouth went dry. She had practiced what to say, but now that the moment had come, the words seemed to stick in her throat. She glanced at Mia again, then took a deep breath, steadying herself. I don't have the money, Your Honor. My daughter and I, we've been struggling. I'm doing my best to keep a roof over our heads. I don't have much left after paying for the bills and food. I'm asking for your understanding. If I pay this fine, I don't know how I'll be able to afford meals for us next week, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The judge didn't respond immediately. He stared at her for a moment, his gaze impassive, as if weighing her words against something deeper, something beyond the legal arguments. The room remained silent, the tension thickening once again. Lily held her breath. She had said what she could, but she couldn't control what would happen next. Would the judge show mercy, or would the law's coldness prevail? And as the courtroom awaited Judge Hunter's response, Mia shifted in her seat, looking up at her mother, sensing that something important was unfolding. Little did they know that this moment, this silent courtroom, was about to change their lives forever. The courtroom, which had been eerily silent just moments ago, was suddenly filled with the soft, innocent voice of Mia. "I'm hungry." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful, and they cut through the tension in the room like a knife. It wasn't just the statement that stunned everyone, but the delivery, uttered with the unfiltered honesty only a child could muster. It was the kind of interruption that shattered the formality of the situation, leaving everyone in the room to wrestle with their own emotions. All eyes turned toward Mia, who was sitting at the back of the room, clutching her small backpack tightly in her lap. Her tiny figure seemed even more fragile in the sea of adults. She shifted in her seat, her face upturned toward the judge, her eyes wide and earnest. To her, the courtroom was just a strange, intimidating place, full of people who seemed like they didn't understand what mattered to her most in the world. The lawyers stopped talking, their eyes now fixed on Mia. Even Judge Hunter, who had built his reputation on being unmoved by sentiment or distractions, seemed momentarily caught off guard. His stern face softened slightly, a flicker of something akin to confusion passing through his gaze. Mia's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the courtroom was suspended in a strange kind of stillness, no one knowing what to say or do. The usual hum of legal jargon was forgotten as the focus shifted from the trial to the innocent request of a hungry child. Lily, who had been standing nervously at the front of the room, felt her heart constrict at the sound of her daughter's voice. She didn't know what to do. She had tried to shield Mia from the weight of their circumstances, but how could she explain to her child that the reason they had no food was because of something as trivial as a $200 fine? Her stomach churned with guilt. Mia was only 6, but she could already sense the strain in her mother's voice, the wariness in her eyes. This wasn't the life Lily wanted for her daughter. It wasn't the life Mia deserved. The judge, after a long pause, cleared his throat. "Miss Mia," he said, his voice firm yet strangely compassionate, "I understand you're hungry, but this is a courtroom. You need to remain quiet." But Mia wasn't deterred. Her eyes, wide with innocence, locked onto the judge. "But I'm really hungry," she repeated, her voice small but persistent. She didn't understand why no one seemed to care about her hunger. It wasn't just about the food. It was the feeling of helplessness that seeped into her voice. The helplessness she sensed from her mother, the one that had been present for so long, but was now even more apparent in this tense moment. The room fell silent again, and Lily felt a rush of emotions: shame, frustration, helplessness. She wanted to reach out to Mia, to comfort her, to apologize for everything she couldn't provide. She wanted to tell Mia that everything would be okay, but in that moment, it didn't feel okay at all. The judge looked over at the prosecutor, who was silently observing, his face unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Mia's words seemed to loom larger than any legal argument. And then, as if snapping, "Mia," he said, his tone now much gentler, "I can see you're upset, but this is a very important matter. Your mother is doing her best. We'll make sure she gets the help she needs. But for now, I need you to stay quiet, okay?" Mia nodded, her small face still etched with worry. But she didn't protest any further. She curled up in her seat, her hands resting on her lap, her gaze now fixed on her mother. The room, though still tense, seemed to breathe again, as if everyone had just realized that the legal proceedings were not the only thing that mattered in this moment. Lily gave Mia a small, reassuring smile, even though her heart was breaking. She could see the confusion in Mia's eyes, the confusion of a child who didn't understand why they couldn't just go home, why they couldn't have a simple meal, why her mother was standing in front of all these people in the first place. And for the first time since the trial had begun, Lily wondered if Mia's innocent interruption had somehow shifted the balance. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the rules and fines and courtrooms. Maybe what mattered most was the humanity of the people involved, their struggles, their sacrifices, their love. As the room slowly regained its composure, The trial continued, but the words, the legal arguments, and the fine print seemed less significant now. The true weight of the moment had shifted. It wasn't just about the law. It was about the human heart and what we're willing to do to help each other when the world seems to have forgotten the simple, basic needs that bind us all together. And as Mia's soft, innocent gaze met her mother's, Lily found herself holding on to a fragile hope. A hope that perhaps this trial wasn't just about a parking fine. Maybe it was about the things that truly mattered. Lily, her face flushed with embarrassment, quickly turned to her daughter, gently placing a hand on Mia's shoulder. She leaned down and whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Mia, sweetheart, please don't say anything else." Her words were meant to hush the little girl, to smooth over the tension that had suddenly swept over the room. But the pain in Lily's voice betrayed the depth of her feelings. She couldn't help but feel like she was failing Mia in every way. How could she explain that the reason they were in this courtroom wasn't just about a parking fine? It was about the weight of their entire existence, hanging by a thread? Mia, her small face full of confusion, turned to her mother with wide, innocent eyes. "But Mommy, I'm really hungry," she repeated quietly, her voice almost a whisper now. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew the most important thing in her world was her mother's comfort. And her mother's comfort was intertwined with food. She didn't know why she couldn't just have something to eat, why this place was so quiet and so full of strange people. Lily stroked Mia's hair, her heart aching. "I know, darling. I know." She fought back the tears threatening to spill, hoping her daughter wouldn't see the strain in her eyes. Mia didn't need to see her mother break down. Not here. Not now. The room was still. The usual hum of courtroom sounds had evaporated, replaced by the quiet, raw honesty of a mother trying to shield her child from the unbearable reality of their circumstances. Everyone in the room, from the prosecutor to the lawyer, from the bailiff to the jury, seemed to be holding their breath, unsure of what to do next. They had all witnessed the toll of life's struggles on the faces of the accused, but this was something different. It was a moment that transcended legal arguments, one that connected them all to something deeper, something human. Even Judge Hunter, known for his unwavering demeanor and strict adherence to the law, seemed to soften. The normally stoic man, who was accustomed to making tough decisions without flinching, sat in silence for a few moments longer. He hadn't expected this. A courtroom was a place for facts, for procedure, for order. But in the midst of this trial, in the quiet simplicity of Mia's words, something more profound had entered the space, something that even the law couldn't easily define. He cleared his throat, his voice wavering slightly, and for the first time in the trial, there was a gentleness in his tone. "Miss Mia," he began, but his voice was different now, less commanding and more compassionate. "I understand you're hungry. It's difficult, I know. We all need food to feel better." Mia nodded, though her stomach growled louder now, causing her to shift uncomfortably in her seat. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but it was hard for her to be embarrassed when all she could think about was the empty feeling inside her. Her eyes flickered back to her mother, and Lily smiled softly, trying to reassure her. Lily's heart swelled with a mixture of love and guilt. She had done everything she could to protect Mia from the harsh realities of their life. She tried to keep things normal, to shield her from the financial troubles, the lack of food, the mounting bills. But Mia's innocent outburst had revealed the truth in its purest form: hunger, pain, fear, love. Lily felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She couldn't break down in front of Mia. Not here. Not now. But she couldn't deny the truth anymore. They were struggling, and Mia had seen it, heard it, and now felt it. The judge's gaze softened as he looked down at the papers before him. He was trying to regain control of the situation, but it was clear that something had shifted. He paused, reflecting on Mia's words and their impact. For a moment, he wasn't just a judge in a courtroom. He was a human being, confronted with the painful reality of life, far beyond the black and white decisions he had to make daily. He looked up again, meeting Lily's eyes for the first time during the proceedings. "Miss Green," he said, his voice quieter now, "this isn't an easy situation. But I want you to know that we will consider all the circumstances before we make our decision." Lily nodded gratefully. though her heart remained heavy. She didn't know if that meant they'd find a way to avoid the fine, or if it was just more empty promises. But for the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of hope in her chest, however faint it might be. The prosecutor, who had been watching the interaction with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He too was feeling the weight of the moment, though he didn't fully understand why. Something in the air had changed. The case, once so cut and dried in his mind, now felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit neatly together. The silence stretched on for a few more moments before the judge spoke again, his voice steady but filled with a newfound understanding. "We will reconvene in 15 minutes for a brief recess," he said, signaling the end of the proceedings for now. "Miss Green, I advise you to take a moment to care for your daughter." Lily's hands trembled as she gathered her things, but she was grateful for the small break, for the opportunity to comfort Mia. As they stood to leave the courtroom, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room upon them. Some were sympathetic, some uncertain, but all of them had witnessed something profound that day, something that would stay with them long after the trial ended. Mia, still clutching her backpack, looked up at her mother, her small hand slipping into Lily's. "Mommy, are we going home now?" Lily smiled, though her heart ached. "Not yet, sweetheart, but soon, very soon." And in that moment, as she looked down at her daughter, she realized that Mia's simple, childlike honesty had done something no lawyer or argument could ever do. It had opened the eyes of everyone in the room to something much greater than a fine or a case. It had reminded them of the deep, shared humanity that connected them all. Judge Hunter sat silently, his eyes still focused on the small girl sitting with her mother. The courtroom, which had moments before buzzed with tense arguments and legal jargon, now seemed eerily quiet, as though the weight of Mia's innocent words had taken over the entire space. His gaze was fixed on her, and for the first time in a long while, the usually stoic judge found himself lost in thought. Mia, her small hands nervously clutching her backpack, was staring down at her shoes, too young to understand the weight of the eyes upon her. Her simple confession, "I'm hungry," had unraveled something in the room, a truth that no one could ignore, not even Judge Hunter. For a brief moment, the hardened exterior that Judge Hunter had built over years of presiding over difficult cases seemed to falter. He had seen many things in his time on the bench: criminals, victims, families torn apart, people desperate for a chance, a break. But none of those cases had struck him like this one. None of them had come with the purity of a child's plea for food. His stern face softened, the furrows in his brow relaxing, and his eyes, usually cold and calculating, now held a flicker of empathy. The emotional weight of the situation was undeniable. It wasn't just about a parking fine anymore. It was about the human cost of the law, the very real struggles that individuals like Lily and Mia faced every day, often unnoticed by those in positions of power. Judge Hunter had always prided himself on being impartial, on making decisions based solely on the facts and the law. But as he sat there, looking at Mia, he couldn't help but question the fairness of it all. How could the law be so rigid, so unyielding, when people like Lily and Mia were at its mercy? He knew, in his heart, that he couldn't let this case follow the same path as every other case he had handled. In his many years as a judge, Hunter had seen families torn apart by poverty, by circumstance, by systems that were meant to serve them, but too often failed. He had watched as people came and went through the courtroom, each of them trapped in their own struggles. But this time, it was different. This time, the face of the struggle was a little girl who simply wanted something to eat. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk before him, and took a deep breath. He had made his reputation by sticking to the rules, by adhering to the law, but he was beginning to see that sometimes the law needed to bend to the humanity of the situation. For the first time in a long while, Judge Hunter felt conflicted. He was a man of principle, but he was also a man who had been moved by something beyond the law. Mia's innocent eyes, her quiet plea, had awakened something deep inside him. He couldn't ignore the fact that there were more important things than legal procedures, things that no ruling could account for. His mind raced, thinking of the possibilities. Could he really make an exception? Could he offer something more than just a judgment on the case? He had the power to impose a fine, to make things harder for Lily, or he could choose to use his authority in a way that might actually help. A small voice inside him urged him to do the latter, to make a decision that wasn't just based on the law, but on compassion. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice breaking the silence that had lingered. "Miss Green," he began, his tone softer than it had been before. "I need to ask you a question." His gaze remained on Mia for a moment longer, then returned to Lily. "How long has it been since you've been able to sit down and have a meal together without worrying about where the next one will come from?" Lily's throat tightened, her heart aching. The question cut deeper than any legal argument could. She hadn't realized how long it had been since they had sat down for a meal that wasn't rushed, a meal that didn't come with a side of anxiety and worry. She looked down at Mia, whose innocent face was still watching her. And for a moment, she didn't have an answer. She couldn't remember the last time it had been simple. I don't know," she whispered, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "It's been a while." Judge Hunter's expression softened further, his gaze lingering on the mother and daughter before him. It was clear that he had made up his mind. Without waiting for a response, he spoke again, his voice steady but filled with empathy. "I'm going to defer the fine," he said, surprising everyone in the room. "And I'm going to arrange for some immediate support for your family. This isn't about whether or not you can pay a fine. It's about ensuring you and your daughter don't go another day like this." Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" she stammered, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "I'm giving you a break, Miss Green," Judge Hunter continued, his voice unwavering. "Consider it a second chance, not just for you, but for your daughter. It's time that you focus on what truly matters, and not on things like fines and bills." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as the enormity of what was happening began to sink in. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of hope. She reached out for Mia's hand, squeezing it tightly, and for a moment the courtroom seemed to fade away. Judge Hunter, who had always prided himself on his impartiality, had just made a decision that went beyond the law. It was a decision rooted in compassion, in the understanding that sometimes the true measure of justice wasn't about rules or fines, but about doing what was right for those who needed it most. And in that moment, Mia, with her simple request for food, had reminded them all of the humanity that lay at the heart of every case. The silence in the courtroom deepened as Judge Hunter turned his attention fully to Mia. It was a stark contrast to the usual stern authority he carried in his voice, but today, something about the situation, about this little girl, was different. His deep, gravely voice, usually commanding and filled with authority, was now softened, almost gentle as he asked, "Are you hungry because you haven't had lunch?" The room held its collective breath, waiting for Mia's response. For a moment, the weight of her simple words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Judge Hunter, the man who had spent years presiding over countless cases without showing the slightest sign of emotion, was now looking at Mia as though he were trying to understand her in a way he never had before. Mia, who had been nervously fidgeting with her hands in her lap, looked up at him. Her wide eyes, filled with innocence, met his for a moment before she looked down again, a little shy under the attention of so many people. She nodded quietly, her small voice barely audible as she responded, "I didn't have breakfast either." Her words cut through the tension like a knife, and in that instant, the reality of her situation became painfully clear to everyone in the room. Mia's simple honesty, her willingness to speak the truth in front of a room full of strangers, made the silence even more deafening. The courtroom, which had once been filled with legal jargon and debate, was now filled with something more powerful, an uncomfortable awareness of the hunger that wasn't just physical, but emotional. Everyone in the room felt the weight of her words, and for the first time, they weren't just listening to a case, but to the voice of a little girl who had been ignored for far too long. Judge Hunter's gaze softened further, his jaw tightening slightly. The truth of Mia's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He could see the toll that hunger had taken on her, not just in her body, but in the way she spoke. Her words weren't just a simple statement. They were an expression of something deeper, something no child should have to endure. Mia's words, so raw and unguarded, reminded everyone present of what really mattered. They were a reminder of the simplicity of childhood, a time when hunger should be the least of a child's worries. Yet here she was, in the midst of a courtroom, speaking up about something so basic, yet so often overlooked. Judge Hunter swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. For years, he had upheld the law with strict adherence, believing that justice could only be served through the letter of the law. But now, in the face of this little girl's vulnerability, he was forced to reconsider what true justice really meant. The prosecutor, who had been standing in the background, shifted uncomfortably, clearly affected by Mia's words. Even Lily's lawyer, once so confident in his arguments, now appeared somber, unable to dismiss the gravity of the moment. Mia, for her part, seemed unaware of the impact she had made. Her small face was flushed with embarrassment, and she cast her eyes down to the floor, wishing the attention would shift away from her. But the room had already shifted. The story had changed. It was no longer just about a parking fine or a mother's struggle. It was about something much bigger, something that no ruling or fine could ever fix. Judge Hunter cleared his throat, his voice a little more firm now, though still filled with the tenderness of the moment. "Mia, thank you for being honest," he said, his tone gentle but deliberate. "It takes a lot of courage to speak up like that." Mia gave him a small, shy smile, still not fully understanding the weight of the situation, but grateful for his kind words. In that small exchange, a connection had been formed, not through the law or through the courtroom, but through shared humanity. The judge paused for a moment, looking around the room. He could feel the shift in the air, the collective awareness that something larger than legalities had just entered the room. Mia's innocent confession had revealed the harsh reality of what so many children like her faced, and it wasn't something that could be ignored or dismissed so easily. Lily, still standing by her daughter's side, felt a knot form in her chest. She had never imagined that a simple courtroom hearing could lead to such a moment. The emotions that rushed through her, shame, gratitude, fear, and hope, were overwhelming. Her daughter, the one person she had fought so hard to protect, was now the voice that had made a judge reconsider his stance on justice. In that moment, Lily realized that Mia had done something remarkable. She had spoken the truth in a way that no adult in the room could ignore. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt a glimmer of hope that things might turn around for them. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break they needed. Lily's heart sank as she watched Mia speak, her words simple yet piercing. Each syllable echoed in Lily's mind, and the weight of her daughter's vulnerability hit her like a tidal wave. She had tried so hard to shield Mia from the harshness of the world, but in this moment it felt like she had failed her in the most fundamental way. The guilt was suffocating. As a mother, Lily's deepest desire was to protect her child, to give her a life free from worry and hardship. She had always believed that no matter what, Mia would never have to go without, never have to endure something as basic as hunger. But now, in the cold, sterile environment of the courtroom, the reality of their situation was undeniable. Mia's innocent words, "I didn't have breakfast either," haunted Lily. How had she let it come to this? The exhaustion from juggling multiple jobs, the constant pressure to make ends meet, and the stress of raising her daughter alone. Everything seemed so overwhelming at times. But Mia, so young and untainted by the world, had asked for something so simple. It was a request that should have been met with a loving, nurturing response, not one born out of scarcity. Lily's hands trembled at her sides, and she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had promised herself she would be strong, for Mia, for their future. But now, standing in the courtroom with the eyes of everyone on her, she felt as if she had failed her daughter in the worst possible way. She had always done her best, but in this moment, her best didn't feel like it was enough. She glanced down at Mia, who now sat quietly beside her, her small hands clasped in her lap. Her daughter's innocent expression, still too young to fully comprehend the depths of her mother's struggle, made Lily feel even worse. Mia wasn't asking for luxury or material things. She was simply asking for the one thing every child should be able to rely on: food. The legal battle that had once seemed so important, the fight to avoid a $200 fine, now felt trivial. How could a parking ticket ever compare to the reality of a hungry child? Lily had been so consumed with trying to survive, trying to make ends meet, that she had lost sight of the more important things. Her focus had been on keeping a roof over their heads, but in doing so, she had neglected the simple, everyday things that Mia needed. Lily's chest tightened as she recalled the last few weeks, the times when Mia had complained about feeling tired or having a headache, moments Lily had brushed off, attributing them to the stress of school or the weight of life in general. But now, in this moment, Lily realized the truth. Mia hadn't been tired from school. Mia had been hungry. Her throat tightened with emotion. She wanted to reach out, scoop Mia into her arms, and promise her that everything would be okay. She wanted to tell her that the hunger would end, that she would make sure Mia would never have to go without again. But Lily knew, deep down, that making those promises felt hollow when she wasn't sure how she was going to keep them. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, Lily heard the murmur of the courtroom around her. Her lawyer, who had been distracted by the emotional turn of events, was now speaking again. But Lily wasn't listening. She was still fixated on her daughter, on the soft, hopeful eyes that had only wanted to fill her stomach. The cold, unyielding reality of their lives was suddenly laid bare for everyone to see. And yet, amidst the shame and guilt, there was a flicker of something else, a small spark of determination. Lily realized she couldn't let this moment pass without doing everything in her power to change things for Mia. She had to find a way to make things right, even if it meant swallowing her pride and asking for help. For Mia's sake, she had to keep going, no matter how heavy the weight on her heart became. The courtroom seemed to fade around her as her thoughts consumed her. She closed her eyes for a brief second, taking in a deep breath. It wasn't just about the parking fine anymore. It wasn't even just about the struggles she had faced up to this point. It was about Mia, her daughter, and the promise she had made to herself to give her a better life. "I'm sorry, Mia," Lily whispered softly to her daughter, though no one else could hear. "I'll do better. I swear I will." The moment felt suspended in time, and for the first time, Lily's focus wasn't on the case at hand, but on something far more important, the future she was determined to create for Mia, one where hunger and hardship wouldn't be their constant companions. The room was quiet for a moment, as if everyone was still trying to process what had just happened. The sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that Judge Hunter had built his career on seemed to have dissolved, replaced by something more human, something that reached beyond the confines of the courtroom. With his gaze still fixed on Mia, the judge's voice softened, almost unrecognizable. "The court will take a recess," he declared, his words hanging in the air. "Mia, come here. You're going to get something to eat." Lily blinked, stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The judge, the man who had presided over countless cases with unwavering severity, was now turning his attention to her daughter's hunger. Was this real? Was he truly offering to help? For a moment, Lily felt as though the entire courtroom was holding its breath, unsure whether the judge had truly meant what he said. But then Mia stood up slowly, looking at her mother for guidance. Lily nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Mia walked hesitantly toward the judge, her small steps unsure. Judge Hunter, who had remained a figure of authority throughout the proceedings, now bent down slightly to meet her gaze. The room was still in shock, the normally rigid atmosphere softened by the unexpected kindness that had filled it. "Come on, Mia," Judge Hunter said gently, offering his hand to the young girl. "Let's get you something warm to eat. No child should have to sit through a court case hungry." Mia hesitated for only a moment before taking the judge's hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and hope. As they walked toward the door, Lily stood frozen, her emotions running wild. She couldn't quite understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about the legal system anymore. It was about compassion. It was about humanity. Lily, too overwhelmed to speak, stood motionless for a few seconds. She had been so focused on the battle ahead, on the weight of the fine, the fear of what would happen to them if she couldn't pay. But now, here was this unexpected act of kindness, something she hadn't seen in so long, that made her question everything. The judge had made a decision, but it wasn't about the law. It wasn't about whether Lily could pay the $200 fine. It was about recognizing something more important than any fine or legal process: the real human need for compassion, for kindness, and for taking care of one another, especially in times of hardship. As Mia disappeared through the door with Judge Hunter, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Even the prosecutor, who had been so intent on making sure the law was followed to the letter, looked momentarily shaken. Lily, still standing at the front, felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was as if the weight on her shoulders had been lifted, just a little, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. She knew that she wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe, just maybe, there were people out there who cared, not just about rules or fines, but about the well-being of others. It was a lesson that she would carry with her for the rest of her life, that in the darkest of times, kindness could shine through in the most unexpected ways. The recess was brief, but it felt like a moment of clarity in a storm of chaos. The judge, the lawyer, the prosecutor, they all saw something more important than a case to be won or lost. They saw a little girl, hungry and in need, and they saw a mother doing everything she could to protect her. And for that brief moment, the courtroom was no longer a place of cold legal proceedings. It had become a place of human connection. Judge Hunter reached beneath his desk, his large, stern hands brushing against the surface for a moment before pulling out a simple brown paper bag. It wasn't much, just a sandwich, a juice box, and a small dessert. But to Mia, it was everything. As he handed the bag to her, Mia's eyes widened with surprise. For a brief moment, she hesitated, unsure of what to do. But the hunger that had been gnawing at her since the morning was too strong to ignore. Her small fingers grasped the bag eagerly, and as she pulled it open, the smell of the sandwich filled the air. Her face lit up, a mixture of joy and relief washing over her. Her stomach, which had been growling so loudly moments before, was now content. Mia sat down on a chair beside the courtroom, her legs swinging beneath her as she took a bite of the sandwich, her eyes closing for a moment in bliss. The sweet taste of food, something so simple yet so vital, seemed to bring a sense of calm to her that everyone could feel. She didn't need to say a word. Her happiness was evident in the way she savored each bite, her innocence reminding everyone in the room of what truly mattered. As Mia ate, the room fell into an unexpected stillness. Even the harshest critics, the most cynical minds, seemed to be softened by the sight of this little girl, enjoying a meal that many of them took for granted. Her small hands held the juice box with such care, as if it was the greatest treasure she had ever received. She didn't understand the magnitude of the situation, but her simple joy at being fed had a profound effect on everyone around her. Judge Hunter, usually so composed and distant, watched the scene with a softening expression. He leaned back in his chair, his usually stern face now bearing the rarest of smiles, a small, gentle curve of his lips. His gaze lingered on Mia as she chewed, her little face glowing with contentment. For the first time in his career, the judge wasn't thinking about the law or the case. He was thinking about a hungry child who now had something to eat, and how this small act of kindness, so simple yet so meaningful, had the power to change everything. Lily, standing quietly at the back, wiped a tear from her eye as she watched Mia. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen her daughter so at peace, so free from worry. For a moment, Lily allowed herself to forget about the fines, the struggles, and the uncertainty of their future. All that mattered at that moment was Mia, safe, nourished, and happy. The entire courtroom, too, was affected. The prosecutor, who had been so firm in her stance just moments before, glanced at the judge with a look that was part confusion, part admiration. Even the bailiff, usually indifferent to the affairs of the courtroom, couldn't help but look over at the scene unfolding before him. There was something pure and human about it, something they all recognized deep down. In that moment, Judge Hunter's decision to offer a simple meal had become a symbol of something far greater than food. It had become a gesture of compassion, a reminder that behind every case, behind every law, there were human lives. Lives that needed kindness, attention, and care. Mia finished her sandwich, the last crumbs wiped from her hands. She looked up at Judge Hunter, her big eyes sparkling with gratitude. Without a word, she climbed back into her seat beside her mother, who gave her a gentle hug, overwhelmed by the warmth that filled the courtroom. It wasn't just a meal Mia had received that day. It was a gift of empathy, understanding, and a reminder of what it meant to care for each other. And as the courtroom watched Mia finish her meal, a quiet understanding passed between them all. The law could be rigid, but humanity could still shine through, even in the most unexpected of places. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. The harsh, rigid air that once filled the space had dissipated, replaced by something softer, warmer, something human. The usual sounds of rustling papers and the shuffling of feet seemed muted in comparison to the quiet but profound shift that had taken place. It was as if the room itself had breathed a collective sigh of relief. The tense debate between Lily's lawyer and the prosecutor, which had been at the forefront of everyone's mind moments before, now seemed trivial. The focus had shifted. The argument over a parking fine, a mere $200, felt insignificant in the wake of what had just transpired. It was no longer just about the law. It was about life. It was about people, struggling, surviving, and trying to do their best despite everything that weighed them down. Lily, once sitting in the courtroom with shoulders hunched, feeling the weight of the world on her, now sat taller. Her heart had been heavy with shame and guilt, but with Mia's simple act of eating, a shift had occurred. For the first time in a long while, Lily didn't feel entirely defeated. She could see her daughter, content and at ease, and the image was enough to replace the overwhelming worry with a glimmer of hope. The pain of her struggle didn't go away, but it was shared now, by the judge, by everyone in the room. It didn't feel like she was alone in her fight. Even the prosecutor, who had been so stern, seemed to pause for a moment. There was no immediate judgment in her gaze anymore, no sharp words ready to cut through Lily's defense. Instead, there was a quiet recognition of the humanity in the room, a shift in her expression that spoke volumes. Judge Hunter, seated at the bench, felt a similar change within himself. His gaze, usually fixed with an unwavering authority, now held something different, something gentler. His role was still clear to him, but in that moment, he realized that justice wasn't just about upholding the law. It was about understanding the people behind it. He saw a single mother trying to protect her child, and a little girl who only wanted to feel safe and nourished. The law could be unforgiving, but there were moments when it had to bend to the needs of the heart. The recess had given everyone a moment to breathe, that to reset, to reconnect with something deeper than their professional roles. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint sound of pages turning, it all seemed to fade into the background as the room filled with a shared understanding. It was a quiet kind of solidarity, one that didn't need words to make its presence known. Lily turned to look at Mia, still quietly sipping her juice. A soft smile formed on her lips as she reached out to touch her daughter's hair. In that simple act, she felt a small spark of peace. The constant battle she had been fighting, the constant pressure to survive, had taken so much from her. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to be present with her daughter, to be grateful for this small moment of calm. The courtroom had become something more than just a place where legal battles were fought. It had become a reminder that in the end, it wasn't just the law that defined a person's worth. It was the kindness they received, the love they gave, and the moments when people allowed themselves to be vulnerable, to share their struggles, and to be seen for who they truly were. As the recess continued, there was no rush to return to the case at hand. No one seemed eager to push the trial forward. Instead, everyone sat in the quiet understanding that sometimes, in moments of unexpected humanity, the most profound changes happen, not in the courtroom, but in the hearts of those present. As Mia finished the last bite of her sandwich, the courtroom seemed to exhale in unison, a quiet acknowledgement that the tension had shifted, replaced by something deeper. Judge Hunter, his eyes still on Mia for a brief moment as she savored the meal, slowly turned his gaze back to Lily. There was no rush to return to the formality of the trial, but the time had come for a decision to be made. The room quieted once again, the hush more respectful than before, as everyone waited for the judge to speak. His voice broke the stillness, but it wasn't the cold, authoritative tone that had filled the courtroom earlier. There was warmth in his words, a softness that was rare from the usually stern judge. I've seen many cases in my time, Judge Hunter began, his gaze steady yet compassionate. "And I've handed down many rulings, but this one is different. $200 is a significant amount, but I understand that in your circumstances, it's not just about the fine, it's about survival. You're doing your best to care for your daughter, and that's what matters." Lily felt her heart skip a beat. She had expected the judge to continue with the penalty, as was often the case in situations like hers. But instead, there was a shift, a kindness that she had never anticipated from someone who held such power. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. Judge Hunter continued, his voice calm but resolute. "In your situation, I believe you need help more than punishment. So, I'm going to reduce your fine. You won't be required to pay the full $200. Consider this my way of offering you some relief during a difficult time. And above all, please take care of your daughter." The words hung in the air, the weight of them settling on Lily's shoulders like a soft, reassuring blanket. For a moment, she was frozen, unable to process what had just been said. The courtroom, which had been filled with the sharp edges of legal arguments, now felt like a place where compassion could reign. She had come in expecting judgment, expecting to lose, but now she was leaving with something far more valuable: understanding. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she looked at the judge. She couldn't speak at first, her voice trapped by the unexpected kindness she had just received. Mia, unaware of the full significance of the moment, simply sat quietly, sipping the last of her juice. But Lily's heart swelled with emotion. This wasn't just a reduction in a fine. It was a reminder that there were still good people in the world, people who saw beyond the legalities to the human need beneath. "I thank you," Lily finally managed, her voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you enough. You've given me hope." Judge Hunter gave a slight nod, his expression now one of quiet satisfaction. He had done what he could to help, but it was clear that the real power of the moment lay in the connection they had shared, human to human, beyond the courtroom's cold walls. "I only ask one thing," Judge Hunter said, his tone returning to its usual authoritative yet gentle cadence. "Take care of each other. That's the most important thing." Lily nodded, her tears now falling freely. She glanced down at Mia, whose small face was glowing with the simple joy of having a meal. In that moment, Lily realized that while the road ahead was still uncertain, she wasn't alone. There were still people who cared, still moments where compassion could make all the difference. As the courtroom slowly began to return to its usual rhythm, the case was officially closed. The prosecutor, the lawyer, and the court staff went back to their duties, but the memory of what had just happened remained. For Lily and Mia, this day would not be defined by a parking fine, but by the kindness of a stranger who had seen them for who they truly were. Judge Hunter, too, would carry this moment with him. It had been a rare occasion, one that had reminded him why he chose to sit on the bench in the first place, not just to uphold the law, but to bring a sense of justice that acknowledged the heart and soul of every person who walked into his courtroom. As they left the courtroom, Lily and Mia walked out together, the weight of their troubles a little lighter, their hearts a little fuller. And somewhere, deep inside, they knew that the kindness they had experienced that day would be the strength they carried with them into the future. As Lily and Mia stepped out of the courthouse, the world outside seemed brighter, somehow lighter. The sun shone a little warmer, and the bustling streets seemed less daunting. Lily still couldn't believe what had just transpired in that courtroom. It felt like a dream, a moment that would stay with her forever, shaping her view on what truly matters in life. Inside the courthouse, the whispers of surprise and admiration continued to swirl. Judge Hunter's decision had become the talk of the day, spreading through the hallways like a ripple of hope. Those who had witnessed the events knew that this was not just about a legal case. It was a profound reminder that life isn't always about the law or the rules we follow. Sometimes the most important thing we can offer one another is compassion. Lily had been prepared for a harsh verdict, even bracing herself for the worst. But what she received was something unexpected, something she never could have anticipated: kindness in the face of hardship. The judge's decision wasn't just a reduction of a fine. It was a moment of humanity, a message that no matter how difficult life gets, there is still room for understanding and mercy. Lily felt a sense of relief, but there was more to it than that. She felt seen. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible in the eyes of the law. She wasn't just a case number, a struggling mother with a parking violation. She was a person with hopes, dreams, and a daughter to care for. The judge had recognized that, and in doing so, he had given her more than just financial relief. He had given her the courage to keep going. For Mia, the moment was simpler. She was just a child, too young to grasp the weight of the situation. But in her innocent eyes, there was a spark of joy as she held onto the brown paper bag with her meal, her hunger finally satisfied. She looked up at her mother with a smile, unaware that the world had just shifted in their favor. Yet, that smile, pure and untainted by the worries of the world, was a reminder of what truly mattered. The love between a mother and daughter, the simple things that often get lost in the chaos of life. As they walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, the bond between Lily and Mia felt stronger than ever. Lily knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but the weight she had carried for so long had been lightened, if only for a moment. She had witnessed a powerful truth. When we show compassion, we have the power to change lives, even in the smallest of ways. Judge Hunter, too, had learned something that day. His decision wasn't just a rare act of kindness. It was a reminder that even in the most structured and rigid systems, there's always room for humanity. He had made a difference, not through his legal authority, but through his capacity to see beyond the surface and recognize the struggles of others. It was a lesson he would carry with him, shaping his future decisions with a bit more heart. The case, in the end, wasn't just about a parking fine. It was about what happens when we choose to look past the rules, when we allow ourselves to connect with the people in front of us, not just the circumstances they bring. The true power of the courtroom wasn't in the verdict. It was in the way lives were touched and changed by a single act of kindness. As Lily and Mia walked away, the echoes of the courtroom's transformation lingered in their hearts. It was a day that would forever remind them of the power of empathy and the simple yet profound truth that sometimes all it takes is one person to make a difference. And in that one moment, everything had changed. As Lily and Mia left the courtroom that day, the world felt just a little kinder, a little brighter. It was a day when compassion triumphed over cold legalities, when a simple act of kindness had the power to lift the weight of the world off a mother's shoulders. Lily walked out not only with a reduced fine, but with a renewed sense of faith in the goodness of others. And as Mia held her lunch in her hands, her stomach finally full, her innocent smile said everything that words could not. They had been seen, heard, and most importantly, they had been cared for. This moment, in its simplicity, is a reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can offer each other is kindness. One small act can change the course of someone's day, or even their life. As we navigate the challenges of our own lives, let's not forget to look for the humanity in others, to offer a helping hand when we can, and to never underestimate the power of empathy. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. And if you want to see more heartwarming stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more uplifting content. Let's spread kindness together, one story at a time.